you very much for the wonderful introduction. I would like to start with sharing my screen and pulling up the PowerPoint. I have to say before I start that when I was writing the paper, and conceiving it a little bit more closely than in the abstract, I started really focusing on painting only. So now the actual title is Painting, Abstraction, Sensation, and Digital Aesthetics. And I want to start, obviously, for the link to Bonn with Katharina Grosse. Some contemporary artists, such as her, who are frequently classified as abstract painters, struggle with this term and question its accuracy and relevance. Rather, they argue that their paintings exist as new realities and visualize things, in quotation marks, that are unnameable to create productive instabilities, or with Martin Heidegger, one could say, they try to let things show themselves. Considering such thoughts, I want to begin this lecture with the suggestion that abstract and real might be precarious and unstable categories. The medium of painting, which has historically proven itself to be a very expansive and porous art form, remediating itself over and over again, might actually be well suited as an arena in which to cast and perform such uncertainty. With or without the use of technology, Grosse and other painters, in place of drawing on what we perceive as the real as a means of creating fictional realities, fashion new and previously unknown fields for human action, discourse, and sensorial encounters. In light of painting's expansiveness, critics and art historians have recently stressed painting's residual specificities, such as subjectivity and liveliness, to theorize painting as a marker of unmediated human experience insofar as it carries connections to its maker. Isabel Graf contrasts these qualities to photography's purely indexical and hence historical features. She asserts, quote, the subject-like power of painting, emphasizing its, quote, emphatic materiality and, quote, its self-active existence, as well as the imaginary and quasi-presence of the absent painter. And that despite all the medium's despecifications. According to Graf, the uniqueness of painting today is still to be found in the individual imprint of the artist's hand as a manifestation of agency and human expressiveness. Individualized selections of color, paint materialities, and a variety of painterly marks create an instant sensuous presence that distinguishes it from analog flat photography. Yet the physical representation of light and shadow in analog photographs and films, as well as the pixelation in electronic images, are also mechanisms that affect the viewer's sensations and bodily responses, yet in ways, if we follow Giorgio Agamben, that are much more intentionally generated. Such forms of analog representation on the one hand and digitally created images on the other are often described as dematerializations that organize human experience. By contrast, abstract paintings, according to David Joselet, are without direction, drifting and floating, dispersing and garnering sensory stimuli. And while the affective power of the photographic image is indexical of some past moment, and while a painting collapses past, present, and future through the latent presence of the individual maker, digital images seem to occupy a position in between. They are machine-made, computable, and mutable, yet they also represent temporal duration simultaneously. The actual image and its virtual double persistently impact each other. That's taken from this very recent book by Gilles Deleuze on painting. This lecture explores the expanded field of painting and digital aesthetics, which oscillates between abstraction and the real. Through vastly different approaches, artists have merged digital image making and painting to refashion the medium conceptually and literally. Both digitization and painting elicit affects, feelings, and bodily or sensory experiences, which may include sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. In the paintings, these responses are often qualified in opposition to each other, divorcing the handmade from the machine-made. The latter is frequently seen to mobilize more predictable emotions, while painting stimulates the senses in surprising and unexpected ways through various materialities, supports, colors, and mark-making techniques. In order to study such contemporary approaches to painting, a particular tension between the human-made and machine-generated is apparent, as well as between dematerialization and material manifestation. While artists recognize and illuminate the epistemological difference of these categories, they also demonstrate that they create within the discourse of the post-medium condition, in which painting has lost its essence, and in which a technologically dominated contemporaneity exists. Early in the millennium, the Luxembourgian artist Michael Mayeros pioneered experiments with digital technologies and media, including early computer games and still and moving images, among other digitally generated formats. In many of his artworks, he mixes digital imagery with pop and mass culture elements, as well as with components of what once counted as high art. At that time, the landscape of the digital was very much a work in progress, unregulated, unordered, and fragmentary, which is reflected in many of his artworks. Using creative strategies not entirely dissimilar to digital tools that were starting to enter the market, such as Photoshop, he filtered, sampled, compressed, recomposed, eliminated, and repeated images and image fragments to think through the history of painting under the circumstances of the digital dawning era. In an effort to democratize painting, which might have been influenced by his encounters with the borderless sprawl of digital media, he broke with conventions to expand painting beyond the limits of canvases and to employ a multiplicity of styles at the same time. He engaged past and present forms of painting, commenting on its history, institutional identity, processes of commercializations, and relations to perception, to challenge the contemporary crisis that insisted at that time on painting's death. In Product, the first slide you see here, he demonstrated how he used digital technologies to call attention to the status of painting. The vertical application of Product in digitized fonts provocatively sits on top of an abstract canvas. It shows spontaneously layered, irregular, rectangular, and curved forms that clash in seemingly digitally enhanced color combinations. An intense green sits on top of a bright blue with dripped paint droplets and various brushstroke marks that amplify the artist's abstract gestural approach. Since this kind of abstraction commercially and critically dominated the medium of painting since the end of World War II, the viewer cannot help but ask if the name Product contests the importance of abstract art, or if it just illuminates the saleability of such artworks. Or does the advent of digitization make emotionally heightened gestural painting superfluous? Mayeros had earlier used the smudge tool, and this is one of his notebooks, to create de Kooning-like brushstrokes. He projected these digitized simulacra onto canvases and other supports to draw or paint them. His smudged sketches refer to this digital tool available today through different design software applications with which one can blend and mix colors to create, for example, smooth transitions. Yet Mayeros was interested in something else. He boldly removed the energy and aura of the de Kooning gestural and unique brushstrokes through computation. Flat, fragmented, and mutilated, Mayeros' digital appropriations are visually and materially disconnected from de Kooning's embodied struggles on the canvas. It remains ambiguous, though, if Mayeros' electronic intervention was intended to deconstruct or even attack the long-shared belief in the subjective singularity and virtuosity of painterly brushstrokes and materiality that are assumed to evoke strong sensorial reactions in the viewer. Or perhaps he, coming to age in the digital era, conceived of the digital and painterly on par with one another. In a liberating move, then, the medium of painting intersected with new media and in turn radically revised art history's long-standing narratives of authorial and expressive individualized creations. By employing technology to alter such existential brushstrokes, Mayeros decisively punctured the theory of liveliness as painting's key quality. This is specifically evident in You Know, You've Got a Bad Habit, You Breathe, a large-scale painting composed of digitized de Kooning brushstrokes, which are ruptured by a fictional cover of LA Weekly featuring the face of hard rock musician Marilyn Manson. Inserted in the image is a line of text that reads, "A pre-examination." The title of the painting, which is not taken from any Marilyn Manson songs, suggests a wide variety of readings, some related to the controversial pop star who modeled his name after Marilyn Monroe. However, we can also understand the title, You Know, You've Got a Bad Habit, You Breathe, to reference the persistent survival of painting. With these and other images, Mayeros laid the groundwork not only for hybrid forms of painting that are hand and machine made, but also artistic investigations that are interested in probing, at times playing against each other, the effective qualities of both visual forms. Similar to Mayeros, the American painter Jacqueline Humphreys works with large-scale canvases that are often beyond human scale. Most of her paintings approximate a square and measure between 9 and 11 feet. At first sight, they do appear to be more or less entirely abstract. Not unlike Mayeros, she considers the medium of painting in the context of contemporary, frequently digitally derived images. Her paintings, too, juxtapose handmade gestures with electronically rendered pictures. In contrast to Mayeros, however, she creates densely layered all-over compositions that include paint pours, as in SSYM Plus from 2020. She also uses stencils, many of which are based on computer codes and are created with a laser cutter. The paint applied by hand sits below and above the stenciled areas, which you can see very well here. Several of these heavily layered works feature what the artist refers to as latent images, subtle recessions or reliefs in the layers under and above the paint. The highly textured and acutely detailed surfaces cause the work to resist photographic reproduction. Although these canvases visually flicker, they first and foremost read as paintings rather than dynamic screens. The British art historian and curator Mark Godfrey has closely engaged with Humphrey's paintings and precisely described the ways she combines brushstrokes, drips, and pours of paint with digital images. As to be observed in her painting Weary Face, she employs immediate and mediated marks, stencils, and simulations of digital keyboard characters, such as the weary face in this case. Godfrey emphasizes that both methods are interrelated and not visualized as opposites. Rather, he argues that they are difficult to differentiate, explaining that it is her complex use of stencils that undermine the binary of immediate and mediated. On the one hand, her compositions are indebted to modern abstraction in that they consist of intuitive and impulsive elements. On the other, they picture the unfocusable, which can be seen as a structural property of the electronic screen with its flickering quality. Consistent with this twofold approach is her application of two base colors mixed with accents of other colors that are visually rupturing one another. Furthermore, she complicates flatness and illusion, including the spatial characteristics of digital culture. She layers various stenciled fields to create deep, actual negative space, as in this image, and concurrently creates optical recessions to push her painted and stenciled forms into the space of the viewer. Mayeros, too, frequently employed foreshortening, at times also merging the fictional with the real, as in yet sometimes what is read successfully stops us with meaning number one, to catapult his digital visual culture appropriations into the the space of the viewer. In this manner, both simulate and concurrently confound the three-dimensional illusions, for example, digital games that appear to aggressively invade the spaces of their players with fast-paced images. These structural semblances, though, are at the same time inseparable, entwined with aspects of anti-perspectival painting. Humphrey has used laser-cut stencils since 2014 to challenge the painter as sole author and individual actor, whose emotions and unique subjectivity, according to the history of art, the painting materially preserves. During that time, Humphreys introduced emoticons and emojis, such as in Smile Green. These, one may contend, can be perceived as a substitute for the expressive element of painting. They are applied to canvases by assistants, which matters insofar as it further highlights non-authorial qualities. In this way, machine-created effects populate the canvas as computational simulations of human emotions and feelings. Humphreys also employs CAPTCHAs, even creating her own CAPTCHA as a signature, as in JH Omega 1 Smiley, which further complicates her take on the human and machine made. Is she announcing the end of human creativity? Or is she taking up this technology through which one demonstrates their human existence to the machine to somehow reassert human and artistic preeminence? Maybe surprising in this context is the fact, already mentioned, that her paintings photographically are not reproducible very well. The large scale of her canvases, the complexity of the stenciled layers, and the texture of the paint are only visible and sensorially accessible in the present of the original physical object. Godfrey proposes that she's visualizing the growing unfreedom of everyday life, including painting, underscoring an abstraction of disenchantment. Without doubt, works such as I/omega, support such reading. It is created by using an ASCII or ASCII configuration, which coded a photograph of an earlier original painting by Humphreys, basically digitally archiving an earlier handmade approach to the medium. However, it historicizes not only the livelihood of painting, but also an outdated technology of coding. Yet why does she retain in other paintings common approaches to gestural painting? She clarified, quote, "I've tried to recast and remold the vocabulary of painting, so it is not condemned to a binary choice between nostalgic, expressive vitality and death by mechanical reproduction," end quote. Her concern then is first and foremost with a painting practice that is self-reflexive of the changed conditions of the medium, recognizing advanced technologies as potentially creative actors. The viewers of her paintings encounter a push and pull between emotions generated by computation and embodied abstract painting. Humphrey acknowledges these unresolved, seemingly contradictory perceptual modes, explaining that, quote, "Screens are both our main way of communicating and the biggest barricade of communication. I use painting to create a different kind of screen that adheres to a more tactile mode of contact." Despite Humphrey's explanations of her work, the capture signature includes an omega, the final letter in the Greek alphabet, making us wonder if she's ultimately implying the end of human creativity. Whether this pessimistic outlook is valid or not, there's maybe one more issue to consider. Even though Humphrey visualizes many immediately recognizable digital codes, such as a variety of smileys, she also employs computer codes that are difficult or even impossible to decipher, such as older ASCII codes like Phaeton, for example. These often tiny abstract symbols are applied to canvases in very laborious ways and also time-consuming ways that counter the instantaneousness of the virtual world with the unwieldiness of the material world. These symbols are certainly as hermetic as abstract paintings, yet they also, and precariously so, echo our technological reality as incomprehensible. In that way, her heterogeneous paintings, abstract and figurative at once, interact with various forms of digital media and technology while concurrently illuminating their detriments. Her works act as visual platforms that invite viewers to contemplate the ways sensorial experiences are represented through electronic symbols, while at the same time stimulated through the materiality of paints and the act of gestural painting. This unstable relationship ultimately obscures our access to or identification with the image. If Humphreys and Mayer's paintings are political in the ways in which they investigate technological control and creativity in the age of late capitalism, then the work of other artists such as Julie Merethu and Ai Weiwei directly focus on the emotional impact of digitally manufactured images. They invoke the incomprehensibility of contemporary politics by connecting it to painting and highlighting its representation as arena of ambiguousness. Merethu's recent practice in painting, drawing, and printmaking asserts the role of art as a thought-provoking and reflexive endeavor that engages contemporary images of pressing socio-political significance. Since 2012, she has employed such photographs in large-scale paintings that are underlaid with broadcast media images of violence and destruction, such as environmental disasters in California anti-Black racist rallies and police brutality in the United States, the Syrian civil war, forced migrations, and ethnic cleansing in Southeast Asia. Many of these deeply disturbing events resonate with her background and experiences as an Ethiopian American who came to the United States as a refugee. Her unmediated painterly gestures are organized in multiple complex layers, repeating and deviating from each other, revealing erasures, transparent grounds, opaque fields of high density, and calligraphic marks, repelling an all-over approach. The digitized photos she uses act as intellectual, affective, and compositional points of departure. Ultimately occluded on the canvas, they have a phantom presence in her highly abstract gestural works. The photographic news and media images are sourced from her digital archive, and more recently, she began employing Photoshop and similar software to crop and scale the images for her compositions. That's what I just showed you here. Importantly, she also uses digital tools, as you can see on the right side, to blur these photos and sometimes combines images of multiple disturbing events. For example, here in Hainini, she joined photos from the California wildfires of 2017 with images of the intentional burning of homes of thousands of Rohingya people, who then represented the largest Muslim population in Myanmar, but have been continuously denied citizenship and human rights by the government. The sprawling, intense red and orange colors together with black script-like swirls and green marks that resemble vortexes translate this impact event into visceral experiences and non-consumable images. However, the viewer can't see the altered media images in order to understand the sociopolitical context. This information is visually obscured through overpainting, and if there are occasional areas of visibility in the background, they're blurred. Merthu explained that, quote, "In these blurs, I felt apparitions, ghosts of the moment represented in the photograph. I'm fascinated with blur, with the loss of focus, with how much of these images still come through," end quote. Evoking the capability of photography to bring to the surface moments of collective or individual trauma in the forms of ghosts or phantoms that activate imaginary projections and affective repetitions, Merthu underscores the significance of the photographic underlayers for her paintings. She stressed that in contemporary media condition, quote, "there are specific images that always rise to the top, that become definitive. You can think of 9/11 and you know what those images are. You can think of Charlottesville and you know what those are. They become recurrent. Those are the kind of images that would haunt me. And those are the kind of images when you look back, become the stand-ins for that moment in time." This creative process is again used in her painting, Black Monolith for Okoye Anversor, Charlottesville, 2017 to 2020, which doesn't reveal the white nationalistic racist rally and counter rally. The title, though, assures us of the strength of Black resistance and guides our reading and physical responses to the painting. The work consists of her signature subjective, or better, psychographic Black gestural marks, various layers that both illuminate and hide transparency, and colorful sprayed and stenciled areas. Despite the energy of her marks and vitality of the paint material, the pictorial structure demonstrates a fissure between subject, the racist and anti-racist rallies, and creative output, the complex, abstract, and multi-layered canvas. In this way, the painting appears thought-provoking, yet also opaque. Here, a photograph of a violent Catalan independence protest in Barcelona is turned into a blurred digital composition, then projected and fixed onto canvas, either through printing or airbrushing, to serve as tableau of sorts for Merthu's mark-making actions. The result is the abstract painting When Angels Speak of Love, Barcelona 2018. The dematerialized and blurred images of real-world events are rematerialized through the mark-making process that illuminates Merthu's emotional working through these violent acts. They recall unnameable forces in motion. The media image is twice transformed to be visualized as a unique personal experience through the collision of shapes, lines, colors, and forms, which in turn empower polysensorial experiences. The artistic process illuminates, among other things, the importance of political images that are approached as trauma, deferred action, or more generally, mnemonic activity, as evidenced through repeated brushstrokes and painted layers that create hermetic palimpsests or eidetic pictures. Merthu believes that, quote, that the whole thing becomes experiential, where there isn't necessarily language at hand for this visual experience, end quote. The modus operandi can be seen maybe in line with Henri Bergson's philosophy of life, in which he theorizes memory images as past, virtual, and unextended, while perceptual images are present, actual, and extended so that the onlooker can enter into the thing. The American artist Glenn Ligon has drawn some parallels between Merthu's political overpainting and German artist Gerhard Richter's Birkenau painting cycle of 2014. It's also about the same time when these paintings were conceived. He used the four surviving photographs taken by Jewish inmates in 1944 from inside the gas chambers in Birkenau. Smuggled out of Auschwitz-Birkenau, they are the only surviving visual records of the mass extermination of Jews at the gas chambers. Richter projected and sketched them onto 4 canvases, so not unlike Merthu's method, and then covered them with layers of red, green, black, and white squeegeed paint. Throughout his career, Richter repeatedly occupied himself with questions of how to respond to images of the Holocaust and how to reckon with its incomprehensibility. Addressing post-war Germany and his own struggle to visualize and confront but not picture the Holocaust, he created paintings that, similarly to Merthu, evoke trauma through invisibility and incoherency. Yet there are also decisive differences. Richter did not blur the photographs that I'm not showing today before overpainting them. He used sources created by victims rather than media coverage. Also, Richter cannot confront the impact event from the victim's perspective. He is part of a nation of perpetrators that includes members of his own family. Consequentially, he forgoes a painterly response that is based on individual gestures, marks, and shapes. Rather, he uses a squeegee and muted palette to overpaint the incommensurable pictured in the historical photographs. The way he gives form to the trauma of the Holocaust is one in which painterly subjectivity and sensorial experience are defied as possibilities, yet the images still exert a chilling effect. In both instances, though, even if the reproduced images are not identifiable, they create a continuous schism between figurative and non-figurative forms, historical time and the time of memory. And they have been contested for both artists on these grounds. Although the title referenced political impact events, the finished paintings don't reveal their subject matter. In Richter's case, the reason is the actual event. Merethu, steeped in a very different cultural and political context, points to the fact that Black painters are denied, quote, the right to abstraction by white critics. She emphasizes visual opacity as a means of resistance and explained that, quote, the complexity lay in that one wanted to create within that rather than acquiesce to the kind of forced descriptive explanatory model that is expected in the United States. She underscores abstraction as a, quote, liberating space that is, following this line of thought, political. Referring to Edouard Glissant and other theorists identified with créolité, Merethu claims the right to opacity, which in opposition to transparency understands difference as that which cannot be comprehended and appropriated. Just going back to have an image of her on the screen. What's so interesting about what happened in that context, she said, was the insistence on créolité, the hybridity of self, the constant negotiation between the colonial self and the experienced self. This crossbreeding of heterogeneous influences resists conforming to expectations. In Merethu's case, it includes the anticipation that a painting, which confronts disturbing political events through digitized mass images, would in some way or the other serve as critical comment about these politics. Instead, Merethu's canvases refocus the liveliness of painting, what Richter described as change, becoming, emerging, being there, thusness, by mobilizing polysensorial experiences, eluding language and explanation. This is especially evident in the ways she employs transparent layers on her canvases without ever fulfilling the promise of illumination and visibility. In a similar vein, her marks, her paints, her relatively flat surfaces, which convey a sense of continuous motion and electrify through igniting sprayed color fragments, underscore her artistic creations as emotionally captivating, yet also impenetrable. The distinctly conceptual artistic practice of Ai Weiwei is, by contrast, thoroughly grounded in an activist political position. His artworks, deliberately anchored in the history of art, frequently allude and respond to such artists as Marcel Duchamp and Andy Warhol. At the same time, the Chinese exile artist has envisioned his artistic practice as a deeply human and political endeavor. As such, he frequently employs provocative aesthetic strategies that explore the beautification and monumentalization of precarious life and the relation between radical artistic gestures and intimate human encounters. What emerges through these meta-politics are aesthetic constellations in which political images are isolated from their context through their displacement into the realm of aesthetic experience, where they achieve a visibility of urgency. By doing so, A intends to change rather than represent the political conditions of life. About 10 years ago, A began using small Lego bricks acquired from the eponymous company, which he assembles to appropriate and alter existing images. This ready-made approach results in a pixel-like digital, yet also pointillist painterly effect, a hybrid of commonplace electronic media, aesthetics, and 19th century French painting methods. In some of these monumental Lego paintings, high and low meet in electronically appropriated so-called masterpieces by Western artists, such as The Last Supper in Green, for example, that draws on Leonardo da Vinci's mural of the same name, while Pollock in blue is based on Jackson Pollock's famous painting 1, number 31 from 1950. Pollock's famous declaration, "I am nature," which he embodied in his painting actions, seems to be turned upside down by A. In contradistinction to Pollock's statement, the cold and flat plastic pieces prevent the anticipated unique aesthetic experience. This mutilated Pollock also demonstrates the way in which digital software is capable of creating such detailed and precise models through which Lego bricks can be assembled into a monumental, larger-than-life painting, in quotation mark. In the same way, A conceived of the political image, Nordstrom 2022. The artwork is based on a widely distributed photograph by the Danish Ministry of Defense, which shows the result of the ruptured Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline. The photograph was taken southeast of the Danish island of Bornholm on September 27, 2022, a day after the leak began. With Nordstrom, A continues his political and social justice activism and engagement by focusing on the impact of human lives rather than capitalist expansionism. The large-scale image vacillates between abstraction and figuration, depending on the viewer's distance from the image, giving onlookers the choice to engage either with a political image of global acuity or simply enjoy a beautiful, albeit flat, non-textured, abstract composition. In both cases, the viewer is emotionally overwhelmed. Neither the abstraction nor the extent of the environmental disaster is comprehensible through rational means alone. The anti-elitist aesthetic of the digital conceived monumental Lego painting, devoid of traces of artistic process, employs the familiar and accessible to intentionally highlight politics and direct perceptual experience, so it is mediated. A's work brings us back to where this lecture began, namely to the conceptual inquiries of Mayeros, who, not unlike A, but at a very different moment in time, investigated high and low, the status of painting and digital representation, as well as how both mobilize our senses in different ways. Mayeros playfully freed painting from its loaded historical associations to undercut existential and polysensorial experiences that are grounded in the embodied actions of the painter and their materials. Both artists, to different degrees, detach the creator from their product to provocatively challenge the liveliness of painting and to underscore their doubt in a sovereign creating subject. Although both Jacqueline Humphreys and Julie Merthu engage with digital media and technology, they continue to distinguish between immediate and mediated experiences, man-made and machine-made, and prioritize painting's capacity to enact emotional and emphatic responses. On the one hand, all these paintings are larger than human scale, so as to underscore the significance of the material world. On the other, they also invoke the massive abstract immateriality of the digital world, specifically in Humphrey's canvases. Then again, they resist reproduction and instead require an embodied spectator to experience the artwork and its sensorial registers. This kind of push and pull project creates an unstable, non-unifying perceptual experience, neither abstract nor figurative, neither entirely painted nor entirely machine-made. These paintings are not identical with themselves. In that way, they are not eidetic pictures, one could say. They cannot exist without digital aesthetics, but only embrace them to a certain degree. As they further expand and destabilize the medium of painting through digital technologies, They create a sharp gap between man and machine gestural painting and electronically generated pixels, and it is there where these new forms of painting actually involve. A further study to conclude this would involve the ways painters today engage with generative AI technologies to think through authorship, painting, its sensorial presence, and technology. Thank you very much.